guess the other girls kind of covered everything else.
Yes, may I just speak of a little bit of post and like you say, we left the Assembly Center and...
No, wait a minute, we're not going to
we're not
Poston
going
yet.
into that.
Yeah, we're still, yeah. We want to ask you a couple questions. We're going to go to Poston. We're going to be in Poston for a while, but what, I wanted to ask you, we had a question from the audience. What was it like? Who was it that ran these camps? I mean, when you were in Salinas Assembly Center, did you know the people that were running them? What was it like to be living there, just not far from your own homes?
I think some of the person can actually see their home from within the Assembly Center. I think they call it Assembly Center, but it's actually a detention center. And the government used all these euphemisms were Assembly Center, Relocation Center, which is actually, I'm getting ahead, I guess, concentration camp. But beyond that, someone else might have additional things to say.
Are there any questions in the audience before we go to Poston about the Salinas Assembly Center?
Who did the cooking? Was the food in the mess hall what you like, or was it?
Oh no, it's the government issued food.
Like Army food?
Army food, and of course, I think out of everybody, they had certain people volunteering for cooks and the mess hall and dishwashers and things like that. And I think the Japanese people are pretty well organized. In other words, they didn't riot in camp. They were pretty quiet. They did what they were told to do. And cooking was done by volunteers. And then the waiters and stuff like that, we all volunteered for everything that was supposed to be done. And the Army had their own menu set up for us. And beyond that, I guess that's about it.
Other questions about the Salinas Assembly Center? Here, let me give you the microphone so you can get on the video.
Schools and children.
Okay, here.
I was just wondering if you have any knowledge about the children, what provisions were for the children being taken out of schools, what happened to them, how they were cared for?
There were no schools in Salinas Assembly Centers because it was a temporary holding place. The schools were organized in Poston, but that's getting ahead of us.
Any other questions about the Salinas? And then we're going to go to Poston here, right here.
Yeah, Laura said don't go too far ahead of the thing. She'll guide us as to what we're
During the time that you were issued the notice, you knew you had to report, did anybody try any legal means of, say, through attorneys or anything like that to stand on your citizenship? Did anybody try to do that, or you just kind of followed what the government did?
No way. You were Japanese and that was it. They were at war with Japan and they wouldn't listen to us. You were of Japanese descent. You were like the enemy, period. And the government had the complete say-so, and what they said we had to follow. You know, there was no other recourse.
Did it affect the Japanese population all the way across the United States, or just mainly on the coastlines?
In the coast, there was no Japanese people, Japanese ancestry from Oregon, Washington, and California. 120,000 Japanese Americans were interned.
I've visited and heard people refer that many of them quick deeded some of their property to friends and to neighbors and to people. Did that happen very much, or someone was just yanked out without making any provisions at all for their property?
Some people just left what they had. I remember in our case we had a brand new Oldsmobile, and I think it cost about $900 brand new, and then it came and offered about $35, refrigerator $5, whatever they couldn't get. They were like vultures, you know, and they came to try to pick up whatever. They knew we were going to leave everything and go.
And what about land? What about...
Oh, land. Okay, we were fortunate in that we had a home, And we had a good realtor friend. His name was Kenneth Couchet. He was a realtor, and he took care of our home. And my dad had some rentals, and he took care of that. He paid the taxes, collected the rent. But if it wasn't for that, I think we would have just abandoned it, and they would have been gone when we came back. But Mr. Couchet did a very good job. It was a very nice fellow.
Mr. Ichiuji, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
There is one story about the people who had taken the most disastrous part. That was the people in San Pedro. They were fishing industry, and they had only were given 24 hours to just pick up anything you can and move on. And you left everything. And just whatever you could carry, they were only able to carry. And they really took a beating, the people in San Pedro. But can I go into Poston?
So let's leave for Poston now. Please let us know what it was like leaving for Poston. But tell us in detail, because you had very good stories about it. Yeah. Right. Okay, or Mr. Yama, okay.
Would you like to start?
Someone take us to Poston. What was it like? How did you get there?
I've been waiting so long for it. Well, we all hear about Poston, but leaving the Assembly Center and also on the train, it took us 4 days from California to go down to Poston. Now, Poston, you hear about Poston, but Poston was a camp.
Speak into the microphone.
Oh, yeah. 3 camps, and each of the camp was known as 1, 2, and 3, and each of the camp held 10,000 people. Well, we went to Camp 3, and so as soon as we arrived at Poston, which was hot, dusty, and barbed wire, and military police, but in a way, as soon as we arrived in Poston, we were assigned housing, and like Craig stated, it was in this tar paper barracks. These barracks, I might explain, is that they were between 100 to 120 feet long and 20 feet wide. And they were divided into 4 or 5 rooms. And if a family of 5 or 6 were assigned to one room. And these rooms, now, they had partitions, but they didn't go up to the ceiling. And so you could hear everybody down to the 3rd room talking. But anyway, these barracks, the Poston 3 was divided into 3 sections, and the 3 sections were approximately half mile apart. And each of the sections, well, held about 3,000 people. And the section, there were 6 sections, so each of the section held approximately 500 people. And within the section, within the blocks, there were 5 or 6 barracks. And that was where the family all resided. Some were 4 rooms and some were 5 rooms. And there were for families and some were for couples and some for single people. And we also stated that we also had a big mess hall. We had a recreation hall. And we had this community bathroom and shower. And we had 1 laundry room. And so we did have entertainment, dancing parties and so forth. However, you know, like my father, who was always so busy being a breadwinner, he just completely lost control of the family. We went our own way. Like the children, they went with their children, with friends, and even at the mess hall, the only person that really sat with the family was the children, with my mother. And my father at times would join us, but we were always on our own. So my father was just lost, and life in the camp was just plain and vacant, and we weren't accomplishing anything, and we all took jobs if we didn't go to school, and we were paid $8 to $19. Now some of these very prominent dentists and doctors were only paid $19, and so but everyone performed the various duties in the camp, and so we were, like Craig stated, we were pretty well organized. And so we were also given the right to leave camp, if you wish, to go work on the outside in the farming. Many left camp to go into harvest sugar beets and so forth. And then it was 1943 that here President Roosevelt authorized the formation of an all-Nisei unit in the Army. Now, my brother Joe, like you stated, he also was in the service, but he was discharged for the convenience of the Army. And so when President Roosevelt authorized the formation of an all-Nisei unit, Nisei is the second generation of Japanese. And well, my brother Joe, he was the first volunteer from our camp because he wanted to show his loyalty because they discharged him. He was really bitter at that point. But he was a member of the 442, which is the famed unit that was most decorated in the U.S. Army. And they were even known as the Purple Heart unit. Now, if I may, I would like to tell you a story about the 442. They were assigned to rescue the Texan Lost Battalion. Now, this unit of these Texans were surrounded by the German soldiers, and they didn't have any means of escaping. And they were running out of ammunition, food, and support. And so the 442 was assigned to rescue this lost battalion. Well, after several days, they rescued 217 Texans. However, the unit had lost 800 members of their own company. And so when the commanding officer asked for review to praise the men of the 442, he was surprised. He said, say, I wanted all the men that could be here at this review. He said, sir, that's the remaining balance of your 442. And they had a very high casualty. And so, well, let's see. I wanted to, well, let's see. Maybe I should have some of the other people explain what there is in the camp. I had my choice on the poster.
We're in Postman. And tell me, I understand they made everyone pull the shades down on the train as you went to Post. Is that true? Do you remember that? And what was that like?
Yes, we were unable to see where we were going, and we had to pull the shades down. I remember that, and the train was very hot, and we didn't know where we were going, and it was, you know, at the time, you know, what can we do? We just sat there, and there's nothing else we could do about it. But I do remember the train ride being one of the worst things, you know, and never been on a train, but this was not what I wanted to be doing. It was a long, long journey when we landed in Poston. And when we stepped out, I thought, you know, the temperature being, you know, way over 100, and Salinas has such nice weather, I thought this must be purgatory.
I don't remember too much. Like Janice and I, we keep talking to each other here, but we can't remember too much. Well, what did you say? Oh, well, I remember the train ride. I remember one family brought us a basket of chicken, fried chicken, to eat on the train. And we were having our chicken, and this military guard, he came over, and my father invited him to join us having the chicken. And he started to have chicken with us, and then his officer above him came and reprimanded him, I remember that, for sharing the chicken with us. That's what I remember on the train.
And Mrs. Sakasagawa, do you remember as you stepped off the train what it was like to see Arizona? It must have been extremely different.
It was very hot. I do remember going into the Camp 2. We were in Camp 2. I remember the people fainting, and I remember they were passing out salt pills. And I remember the people were wetting towels and putting it on their head to keep cool. That's what I remember.
Do any of you remember the stories of the people from Salinas dying because of the heat?
No, I don't. I just remember them fainting. I don't remember them dying.
What else would you like to say about Poston? And are there any questions that you'd like to ask about Poston? And then I want to talk to Mary Otto, who is in a different camp, if I understand. But Poston, is there any other questions about that?
How long were you there, Meg?
Oh, I think most of the families were there about 4 years. But we were there 3 years because my father relocated us to Denver, Colorado. He found a job there. You had to find a job and housing to get out. And he did, so he relocated us. And so we were there a year. Then when California opened up, when we were able to come back, we came back.
We have a question right here.
I've had an opportunity to visit with some that were in the internment. And I guess there was weddings and there was marriages and there was births but you know, when you take a wide spectrum of population like that, you've got a number of elderly and you've got some very small infants. How did they adjust to that change in temperature? And could you tell us how they would have a wedding when they were having a wedding in a temporary facility like that?
We had actually, people have organized and they had church services on every Sunday. I think they tried to have Sunday school for the children. You know, they had the Presbyterian or the Buddhist, you know, they had their separate services for the children. And they try to keep things normal as much as they could. And I do remember going to Sunday school every Sunday, and it was always in a barrack, and it's always hot and unbearable, but we always showed up. My father always sent us to Sunday school every Sunday, so that's what we did. So they did organize things like that, and we're able to, you know, do things and keep people motivated to do, not just sit. And the funny part was everybody knew who came from Salinas because we all walked around with wet towels on our head. Until it was so hot and unbearable, so they knew we came from Salinas.
Mrs. Otto, may I ask you, you were in a different camp, and was it in Canada?
Yes, it was in Canada. It was 100 miles in from the Pacific coast, excuse me. And I don't know if any of you know where Hope is in British Columbia. It's not quite 100 miles in from Vancouver, British Columbia. But that was the first stop we made, and taken off the train to go to board a truck where we were like cattle, and some were standing. I myself stood up and let the elderly sit, and we were shaking this way and that way on the truck as we went 11 miles on this one-way road into this place called Tashme that they had set up for us. Tashme was named after three government people: Mr. T.A. for Mr. Taylor, S.H. for Mr. Shara, and M.E. for Mr. Mead, Tashme, and that's how it got the name. Anyways, when we got there, there was no housing. Some had already gotten their own homes. You know, it's very similar, some of the houses that you described in Boston, the kind of place that you stay, and the system of the mess hall. That's quite similar with what we went through too. So I won't talk about that. But anyways, it took 2 months for us to stay in a barn, a great big barn that they put the late arrivals in, and we were putting cots, army cots. And since there were my father, mother, and my sister, and my brother, we were given 3 cots, which we put together, and the men slept on the top and we slept on the bottom, and surrounded ourselves for privacy with army blankets. And then that life was for 2 months until we got a house of our own, and which was almost like the kind that you described. And there were 1, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms, small, no doors. And we later on bought material to make drapes for each door. And the middle room was the kitchen and the dining room. So anyways, that life went on at Tasby for us for 4 years. And we finally got out in August, right after the end of the war. But it took almost a year before our turn came to say that, okay, where do you want to go? East of the Rockies or to Japan, but not back to your place. My father was running a box factory when the war started, and so that took us a little time for him to do something about the factory, and we did. We were able to sell it for a very little amount to a Chinese man. Anyways, it's kind of hard to go back to those days. But there's a story that needs to be told, I think, and I've been asked quite a few times to speak up about my experience, which I always like to do it because I can forgive, but I cannot forget. And I feel that we should not forget because we don't want this kind of thing to happen to anybody else. No, and it needs to be told. And I'm so glad that you are all here. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to ask questions about Poston?
I have
Yeah,
a
here.
question for Mrs. Otto. Mrs. Otto, you indicated at one time in talking that you taught everyone in your camp to sew. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, we all had to look for something to do, otherwise we'd go crazy. And so, there was a class I taught as a Catholic. There were no priests that came to say Mass for us, except maybe during the 4 years there was a priest that came once a year for Mass at Easter. And then he assigned me and asked me to keep the small community of Catholics together if I would teach catechism to the children there. And there were like about 10 of them, so I did that every Saturday in my home. And then, since I had taken up sewing and designing while I was in Vancouver during the summer, my mother sent me to a designing class, and so I was fortunate to take the class, and I loved it. And that was going to be my career or my profession after I graduated, but I never had the chance. And so I decided I would teach anybody that wanted to know what I had learned. And this was making patterns for each one of us. You measure yourself, the shoulder, the bust, the waistline, and so on. And I taught these women to make their pattern for their clothing because we were not able to buy any clothing. But there was a store that when we asked if they would bring in yardage, this they did. So we were able to buy the yardage there for to make the door for the doorway. We need drapes, things like that. And as far as the machines, sewing machines are concerned, some families managed to bring one sewing machine per family. And I had one myself. And then some of the ladies I taught, they brought their machine to my house and we put it in the bedroom. And I made a makeshift table by putting another table over the bed, which was a wooden-made bed. And at night, that table would go against the wall and hook back, And then in the morning when I start the class, that table comes down over the bed. So we had a nice big table. And so I took the class in shifts, in the morning class, the afternoon class, and even the evening class. And I tell you what, we didn't have electricity. Did you have electricity? Did you? You did? All right, we did not have electricity.
Move on to what it was like to leave these camps. So what have we not said that you would like to communicate about what it was like for 4 years to be in a camp like this? What have we not covered? What did you think of during that time? What did you think would happen? How did it change how you saw America? What more would you like to say? And let's pass this to Mr. Yama, please. Okay.
We talk a lot about camps, but I think most of you haven't got the slightest idea of what they would look like. These are pictures that Ansel Adams took, and these are typical barracks. And this is one block would have about 19 units of these barracks and one large mess hall.
Well, that's what our class was like.
And you can see the children playing around. I think I'll just pass this pictures around and you can just glance through it. But anyway.
I'll pass it around for you.
Okay.
What else? And who else would like to say?
Anyway, we talk all about this barracks, but I think if you actually see what they look like, I think you would get a better picture of what we actually went through.
Well, you'll have to excuse me because I'm using the word I all the time, but I too left the camp and was looking for some place to get an education. So I happened to find Grand Junction, Colorado, where there was a Mesa College. That town was the most prejudiced town you could ever imagine. We couldn't go to a restaurant to eat, and on Mother's Day I wanted to buy a gift for my mother to send to the camp. They wouldn't even allow me to buy a gift, and we couldn't go to a movie. But anyway, I worked as a houseboy to support myself at the college. But then I got a letter from my parents stating that I had just gotten a letter from that I was now classified as 1A. You see, before we had all been classified as 4C, enemy aliens. And so now here I'm being classified as 1A. So I immediately went back to camp, and it was in 1944 that I was inducted into the Army, and I had taken my basic training at Camp Maxey in Texas. Well, upon my completion, I applied for the military intelligence. In the meantime, I was asked to join the Army counterintelligence. Well, it was on the provision that I passed a thorough security check. Well, I passed. Anyway, the story goes is that I didn't see any action, but as soon as Japan had surrendered, I was sent immediately to the occupational champion forces under Douglas MacArthur. Well, I will say that the counterintelligence work was very, very insensitive, and I don't hesitate to tell you that I handled materials that was classified as top secret. Now, our mission there was very questionable, but I do say today that we do not have the Cold War. And so, and taking advantage of the GI Bill, I attended the University of California at Berkeley, where all my buddies were, and I studied accounting and marketing and economics, and so I was very, very fortunate that the GI Bill had taken me through the school, and so I'm very thankful for that.
Mrs. Higashi, what was it like for your family? You had land at home, right, to take care of. Did you write home? Were there people that you wrote to at home? Do you know? Your family?
Our family had property, and we had at least places where we could store our things, and somebody watched our property for us. So we were very fortunate that we were able to come back and everything was there, except some people had vandalized, some things, even though we had people staying there. But we were able to come back. We had a place to come back to.
Well, let's talk about coming back. Tell us what it was like when you found that the war was ending and that you were shortly going to be let out of the internment camps. Do you remember that? What do you remember about that?
Well, I knew my father, someone had gone back and retrieved our family car. So my father and my brother decided that they would drive the car with a trailer, and my brother didn't even have a license. I don't think my father even had a license, but
Drive it from Arizona back to Salinas?
Yes, and we got on the train, and when I think about it, we were just women and children coming back to Salinas, which was not a very one of the worst places to come because of all the battalion, things, and it was not I know we weren't going to be welcome, but we went back and we got off the train, and my aunt was there, and she was the oldest one there, and we all walked from the train depot across, where the trailer park is on Sherwood Drive. That's where our property was, and we walked. We were afraid to call a taxi, so we walked back to our place, and there were people living there, but we had one place that we all slept on the floor. I don't know where we got blankets, but we all huddled in one room and slept on the floor that night. And that was pretty traumatic.
Did you
back.
call any of your friends to say we're back, or what does one say after you've been gone, something like that?
Well, we didn't really get in touch with anybody at that time because my father wasn't with us, and it was just women and children, and we waited till everybody came back, and then we let them get in touch with people. I was just in, high school, and I didn't know anybody to call. So it was, and when my parents came back, they were able to get in touch with people, and we had to start life all over again.
What was that like, starting over again?
Going back to school, we didn't know what to expect, and I don't know, my parents my mother never worked in her whole life. She had to go to work, and there were 6 of us, and we were the older ones, and we had to take care of the children, and we had an aunt that lived next door that was very helpful. So they got to school and came back, and she was there to watch them. So it's everybody had to do what they had to do, and my father had to start thinking about how it's going to make a living again. So it's very stressful for everybody. But we went to school, and we saw some of our friends, and they were very, very nice. I didn't have any bad experience, fortunately. So I was very grateful for that.
Elise, did you have a question?
I was just going to ask Janet, how were you treated when you went back to high school?
Like I said, okay, I was treated okay. Nobody said anything.
Did you lose a couple of years of school as far as, were you a junior or a senior or?
No, I was able to keep up with everybody, They taught us very well. The teacher did a good job teaching us. So I wasn't behind in anything. Yeah, I didn't feel like I was, missed out on anything.
Mrs. Sakasagawa, what was it like for you? Do you remember the day that you left the camps and what that was like?
Well, like I said, we went to Denver, Colorado for a year. We went to very marginal schools there. We were very poor. My father didn't have any money. I know we walked to school a lot because we didn't have money to go back and forth. We lived in a very poor hotel. I remember the cockroaches and the bed bugs there. We were there a year. We came back to California where we were able to come back. My father still had his building on Lake Street where Japantown used to be. So he took over the business there. He had another building where there was a grocery store. So we lived on top of the grocery store where there were some rooms because my grandmother had a boarding house before the war there. And so we stayed upstairs on top of the grocery store, and we had a place to come back to.
And how did people in Salinas treat you? How did it feel in Salinas for you coming back?
I think it was okay. Some of my old friends were very nice. There were some of the newer people that... I remember one incident where someone made me cry because they called me a dirty old Jap or something. So it was reported to the principal, and my mother had to go to the high school and talk to the principal, but it was just a small incident. Some of the restaurants wouldn't serve us. Some of the stores, the salespeople would turn their backs on us and they wouldn't serve my mother. That was some of the few things. But most of the people were nice people. We had a lot of nice friends because after all, we lived here all our lives. And they welcomed us back and helped us start over again.
Mr. Ichiuji, how was it like for you? I don't know quite where you came back to.
Well, as I stated, I was in the service 4.5 years, and so I didn't experience anything returning. However, my parents did return to Pacifico again, and they were welcomed very, very well. And my parents, my father was in the shoe repairing, and he had a business right there at the corner of Forest and Lighthouse in Pacifico, and at the time we lived there all our life, and so we knew quite a few people. They all referred to my father as Ichi, and so he was pretty well known, and so they all treated him very, very well. We didn't have any difficulty returning back to Pacifico.
And Mr. Yama, you told me the story of what it was like to be. Tell it the way you told it to me. When they said, "Okay, you're ready to go." I remember your story about that.
Mine was a different situation. The war in Europe and Japan was going pretty strong, and the army said there's a lot of eligible young men in these camps. Let's draft some of them. So they came into camp, and everybody that was of age, they came in and gave us all physicals, and then they selected quite a few of us. And I got my induction notice, and at that time, some of us were allowed to leave camp. So a friend of mine and I said, "Hey, let's go to Chicago and see the world before they pick us up to go into the army." So we went to the local draft board in camp and said, "We'd like to go out to Chicago." And we said, "Okay." And so they said, "Yes, okay. But report to your draft board in Chicago as soon as you get there." So we got to Chicago, and there was a lot of work in Chicago because there was a lot of labor shortage, and a few of us Japanese American had gone out before us, and they found out that we were real good workers, so we were in good demand. And I reported to my draft board in Chicago and said, "I'm here now, here's my address." In about 2 weeks, I get another classification, 4C. And so I went to draft board. What's 4C? 4F is physically ineligible. 4C is alien, ineligible for military service. So I told him, "I'm a citizen." No, but the Army changed their mind again and they don't want you anymore. So I sat out the war and I didn't volunteer, I just waited for a drafting. And as soon as the war in Japan ended, within 2 weeks I get another draft notice and they called me back in the Army. Okay, in the meantime, the camp was closing, so I went to my draft board and says, I'd like to go back to these camps and help my folks get back to Salinas. I said, okay, report to your draft board once you get back to Salinas. So I report back, I help my folks get back to home here. And then, where was I? And so I report my draft board and said, I'm back here, okay, wait for your induction. And so within about 2 weeks after I came back, I got my draft induction notice, so I reported to Camp Stoneman in Sacramento, and I took my basic training in Shepherd Field, Texas. And after your basic training is over, they assign you to some bakers and mechanic or whatever, and all the GIs and the bears were assigned and all gone. And I look at the list every morning and my name's not on there. Finally, one morning, here's a notice that I'm to report to Camp Halliburton Signal Depot in Baltimore, Maryland. And so I went to the commander and says, I finally got my notice and I'm to go. Well, here's your traveling order. And what they did was they sent me to counterintelligence service school in Halliburton Signal Depot. And there, just like Paul said, we went through a training in counterintelligence, lock picking, surveillance, and all that sort of thing. And we're not actually ready for that sort of thing, but anyway, they needed someone that had a basic language skill in Japanese, and we were the best choice for them. And so, after our training in counterintelligence, we got an order to go to Japan, so I was assigned to the counterintelligence corps in Japan. And the main job that we had was Russia. The United States was afraid that Russia was going to turn Japan into a communist country. And our main job was to make sure all these communist people in Japan didn't push their agenda and try to get us to tie in with Russia. And a lot of people don't know about that, but that's what actually happened. And America was really afraid that the communism was going to come into Japan. And so I spent 8 months in there, and that was our main job, was to make sure all these Japanese people that were pro-communist didn't get the upper hand. And there was a lot of labor movement because Japan had just tried to start to get the recovery, and there's a lot of things going on, but that was our main job. And
it's interesting that actually the people, that American citizens taken out of internment camps in America were then suddenly able to work on the American side in Japan. I find that rather ironic. I'm going to stop you there. Forgive me. We've got a question here, and we're coming to the close of our panel. But here's a question right here.
Hello, thank you. I've heard a lot about the Japanese plight and the internment camps. But I've never heard like Japanese people protesting, and I wonder what is the Japanese culture, if they had a consensus, or Muhammad Ali when he was refusing. Was there a consensus in the Japanese culture?
Well, there's a good word in Japanese. It's called shikataganai. Something that happens, you gotta go with the flow. So there was no reason for us to riot in camp. As a matter of fact, I think the United States had a very easy time in that there was no rioting in camp. we were just like a bunch of sheep. We just followed the order, and that was it. So when you think about it, I think if you had any other nationality, I shouldn't say that, but you might have had a lot of rioting and all that sort of thing. But in these camps, there were a few incidents, but very few. And the United States had a very easy time considering what they had done.
Now I'm going to pass it briefly to Mary Otto to talk about the time that she came out, and then we'll take another question and then we'll close.
I would just like to add one more word, and that is gambare, which means persevere. Persevere. You know, this is another word, a strong word among the Japanese. Okay, well, I would like to end my story with a short little thing that happened to me after the war, when the war ended. The government said you cannot go back to where you came from, which would have been Vancouver. So it's either you go east of the Rockies or go back to Japan. My parents chose to go to Japan. They were too old to start anything else in another part of Canada. So I said, I will go along with you because we're young enough that we could stay with you until you settle in Japan, and we'll come back and be Canadians again. Well, it didn't happen that way for me. I met an American Army personnel, and we got married after 5 years in Japan. I met this person, Wilasato, and so Aminato. My mother at that time said, well, the Japanese didn't like mixed marriages. I'll tell you this, sincerely, I will tell you. They did not like it, but she said to me, her last words were, go and spread your culture, promote understanding, and there will never be a war like this again. So that was her last word to me. And this ship would be when I sailed to America. Thank you.
Are there any comments from the audience to help close our panel?
Well, there wasn't total consensus in the Japanese American community in all the camps. There were so-called no-no boys on the questions. I think it was questions number 27 and 28 before the induction or the draft restarted in the internment camps. So there were in fact, the largest internment camp in the system was Tule Lake, and that had a large concentration of so-called no-no boys. So I just want to make it clear that there were people Japanese Americans, citizens who resisted being drafted, and even though most of them were sent, after they said no on those two questions in the questionnaire, most of them were sent to Tule Lake, and that camp actually was the largest populated camp, which indicates that it was not a total consensus. There was a resistance, and so it wasn't total.
What he's referring to is the loyalty questionnaire. Who can give a quick brief? And we're closing the panel now, so I think this is a good moment to close on the question of loyalty. Because we ask ourselves, what do we owe to our country? What are we willing to let happen to us? Can you frame that?
I know that it didn't happen to me, but then I will say that the father of your family was very, very influential. And I would say a majority of them who had voted no on your specific question 27.
So can you describe for everyone what he's talking about?
Well, the questionnaire was given out to all the eligible soldiers, and it was a question on loyalty. Would you support your country? Or I forgot what the other. There were two parts of that question. But I would say that I know my father. He favored my son going as a 442, and I also, and my other brother, we all went into service. But I would say majority of them they listened to their parents, and I think their father had quite an influence on that no question. That's my thought. But of course, majority of, and like you stated, it was held at Tootie Lake, and it was principally at Tootie Lake. But I know it didn't happen in our camp or many other camps. It was a time that we inducted, you went. We all went to serve our loyalty, to show our loyalty. That was the principal reason to get in the service, to show our loyalty. I'll be honest with you, I was in the counterintelligence like Yamamoto. I didn't speak a word of Japanese, and I had to use an interpreter most of the time. So, but majority of, well, you can see what the 442 did. They sacrificed their life to prove that they were really loyal to our country, and that was almost, I would say almost all the GIs though. They were really loyal. They didn't know any other way, and they weren't in Japan, and everything was given to us in this country, and so we appreciated it and we wanted to fight for it, and that was the reason. I know I stayed 4.5 years in the service for the purpose of, for the convenience of our army, and so I think majority of them did feel that way. They wanted to show their loyalty to our country.
Ask one question.
I read a book, Farewell to Manzanar.
Oh,
Could any one of you tell me, where is Manzanar? Manzanar? Where is Manzanar?
On Highway 395, right next to Independence, Bishop.
East side
And it's a national historical place now.
So I want to thank our panel today, and I would like to thank all of you for coming and listening with open hearts to our neighbors and to what they went through in this town. And I hope all of us take this as a lesson to ourselves and to America about what we're willing to do to our neighbors and who we stand up for. My own husband's from Morocco, and I was in America during September 11th, and I was very aware at that moment that this could happen again. So I'm very committed, and it's very important to me to hear these people who've been very generous with their time. It was quite difficult to find someone who was willing to come and sit and talk about this. Many people just don't want to talk about it. It was a very unpleasant experience, but what I said to each of them is we have to keep this memory alive because we, America, need to learn from it because we could do it again. And all these questions are open questions for us today. So I thank you all for being here and being so generous with us. And I thank you all for the generosity of your listening. And I hope that this will lead to you going home and listening to your family because all of them have these priceless stories, which is what we're trying to bring out in the Salinas Stories program. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you.